Tall Tales. The Nymph Symphony.
Chapters.
Chapter 7. Odyssey. "This must be the mayor's house," the prince said, passing through the beach villa's high-rise gates as we headed uphill towards the sandy main house of this cove's tallest peak. We saw a frail old man waiting outside the stylish summer house retreat in a filthy but high-fashioned red spa robe while he talked furiously to himself. A strong discolored expression upon his weary, gray-bearded face, resembling that of another exhausted laborer after a long, hot day of back-breaking work. I kept behind Arlo as we slowly approached this man. "Greetings," Arlo called to him. The sad man's face lit up almost immediately with a pleasing smile. "I was starting to think the crown had abandoned us," he said gleefully towards us, collecting what little energy he had left to wobble over and humbly shake the prince's hand. "My name is Reuben. I'm the mayor of this town," he puffed out as Arlo and I smiled politely. "Welcome to Ambervale, I guess." He greeted us with a short, stifled bow, the most formal form of courtesies he could deliver. "At this point, I was not expecting to see any relief come at all, let alone the prince himself," he continued, having caught his breath back. "Thank you for coming. I'm honored to have you come here yourself." Being both puzzled and impatient, the prince said, "If I may ask, what sort of support do you currently require the most?" He was careful to avoid accidentally offending the man on what, I suspect, must have been a terrible day for him. The mayor became flustered by our ignorance of his plight, bluntly responding, "Medical aid, my lord. All the village's defenders were wounded in the last reoccurrence of night. They've attacked us in waves. Each night has been worse than the last." He quickly vented, his patience wearing thin the more he had to explain his situation to us. "Your Majesty, he panted, his exhaustion temporarily relapsing. "I requested reinforcements more than 2 desks ago. Why has it taken this long to receive a response?" Arlo and I shared a grim look of concern that his call for reinforcements had never been answered. A terrible neglect on our kingdom's part, and something that made us feel guilty and awkward as we now had to inform him of the real reason we were sent here. "I am truly sorry for what has befallen your people," Arlo said sympathetically to the old man, pausing before he delicately decided to press onwards. "But I'm afraid we have not been sent here to supply reinforcements. We are here on other, more personal matters." "You're kidding me, right?" the man madly vented. "This is a joke. Every guard I had defending my town's walls is now in my house in need of aid. And the 2 of you have come all this way simply to offer your deepest condolences about that?" he snarled, looking out towards the ocean in unquenchable frustration. "Sir, we came out here because the princess has run off. We fear she might have been caught in one of the eclipses somewhere along the way here and may still be in very serious danger." "Have you seen her at all?" I butted in to inform him, trying to sound as respectful as I could. The mayor looked back at us and our whole predicament with even more confusion, turning his head to the side again, ready to speak about it when a female voice spoke up from the direction he was staring. "You're both so dramatic. It's not like I was in any real danger," the sweet young voice said, manifesting somewhere out from the vacant, empty beach breeze of his mansion's front porch. A rebellious princess emerged from her superb camouflage just beside the 3 of us, uncloaking herself from an immaculate form of see-through transparency, flesh turning from scales to skin as it all reverted from a glossy crystal camouflage back into the short blue and white dress she chose to wear out the other day. She had disguised herself perfectly with the curvature of the cliff and its oscillating background of ocean and waves, reappearing only a short step from where the mayor, Arlo, and I were, all our eyes widening in surprise as they turned towards her prismatic appearance, a reaction she often received because of her amazing skills in hiding. She was a tiny teenage troublemaker, a little lord of lies and a witch of infinite whispers, having been a strong voice to the throne at a very young age. She was a passionate and devious diplomat, always sneaking around and using covert tactics to persuasively strong-arm trade relations without the use of violence and conflict. She was a true maiden of mercy. She could always find a peaceful way out of a tight situation, and was notorious for disputing her mother's unjust rulings and using devilishly cunning deceptions in order to force a balanced compromise where none existed. A true jack of all travels, tricks, and trades. She was the kind of girl who was always aware of exactly where she needed to be, and at exactly what time to be there. Even outside of her camouflage, she was a naturally mischievous spy with ears to every room, being able to blend in effortlessly with crowds despite a youthful and innocent face. She had a look one could only compare with diamonds and fine elegant glass sculptures, greatly symbolized by the thin crystalline tiara that always inconspicuously rested on top of her radiant long blonde hair. "Hey, lovely." She grinned cheekily at me as she came over and gave me a hug. I hugged her back tightly, double-checking she was really there. "Well, you picked a hell of a day to leave the castle's walls," she joked, trying to make light of our very bleak situation. I eyed her up and down to make sure she was unhurt. She didn't have so much as a smudge or scratch on her, other than, say, 3 or 4 small rips and tears to her dress. She looked exactly the same as the last time I'd seen her. Despite the trauma, she still possessed the same prettiness and cocky charm that could cause unsuspecting men to stumble when they saw her, or in the standard case of obnoxious knights, kneel and propose flamboyantly, her stunning looks serving as much a blessing as they were a curse. See, all the sweet, sincere men she came across tended to avoid her like she were plagued, feeling too intimidated, or perhaps too unworthy of her favor, to ever go any further than politely introducing themselves. But ironically, this only ever left her vulnerable to the wealthy, unmannered noblemen who always tried to bully her with their friendships and attempt to satisfy their own self-centered ambitions, to command and conquer this world through the title she could potentially deliver to them. I was quite used to her running away, but never had I been so thrilled to finally see her again. Still squeezing her tightly as my only gesture in saying hello back, happy to know that she was safe and I could return to the palace. She was still wearing the fancy blue dress I had told her to wear out yesterday, only barely recognizable due to all the rips, grass stains, and frayed edges. An expensive piece of clothing she wanted to wear, despite getting it tattered and torn from another late evening of ill-gotten adventures. "All right, you might have been right about the dress," I said, holding up a bit of the skirt's torn fabric in my left hand, breaking my brief silence as I accepted that the decision to dress her up nice the day before wasn't in my best judgment after all. "Oh, Kaya, I couldn't disagree more. You were right. Always fashion before function," she joked, trying to boost the gloomy mood by teasing me with a motto I had punted to her long before this. "The gnolls told me it was the tastiest dress they've ever seen," she then quipped, failing to take this whole hazardous situation with any real seriousness. "Anara, do you have any idea what you put us through? Have you even bothered to consider it?" shouted her brother, infuriated beyond belief, mostly annoyed at how nice I was being to her after what she'd put us through. "Don't patronize me, Arlo," she spat back. "I didn't ask for you to come. I'm more than capable of taking care of myself," she snapped, rather immaturely but quick to her own defense, acting like the teen child she was, but didn't believe herself to be. As joyous as it was to see her again, her brother had a valid point. "Anara," I said, moving my hand onto her arm considerately. "We had no choice but to come. Your mother forced us to." My defense of her brother threw Anara off guard, the seriousness of the situation instantly becoming clear to her. I wasn't mad or blaming Anara for what had happened today. Of course, indirectly, she was responsible for everything. But as Arlo had said previously, the gnolls were at fault for all that had happened, and I was only just coming to terms with that idea. Regardless of my own loyalty to Anara, I knew I had to back her brother on this one. I quietly stepped aside, letting Arlo cast his condemning convictions on her. "You might have been nimble enough to avoid danger," he stated. "But we weren't. We didn't know where you were, or whether you were safe or not," he yelled, raising his voice once again, releasing everything he'd been bottling up to say to her since the start of our voyage. His sister stood paralyzed as he spoke. "We lost someone today. Trying to find you," he confessed, forcing Anara into a trembling shock. Drawing the line there, I intervened. "That wasn't her fault, and you know it." I snapped at him, standing back in front of Anara. "You said it yourself earlier. It was the gnolls." Anara pressed a hand to her mouth in remorse, a painful moment passing between her and her brother, before the withered mayor reintroduced himself into the group, approaching us from behind Anara, the lot of us forgetting he was there, listening to the whole unstable convention we were having. "Forgive my indulgence, my lord," Reuben said. "But we begged your mother for help." He locked eyes with Arlo, undeterred from transgressing against royalty. "And nothing but this beautiful girl came to us. The turmoil of these past few days has taken much from each of us, and while words cannot express how sorry we are for the one who was taken from you, we lost many more," he continued, reminding us of the bigger picture. "If it were not for this girl, even more than that would have died." "If I offended you, I am sorry," Arlo told this stranger, attempting to make amends. "I can't change what has happened, but I am sorry for what I've done," Anara said, looking at me before continuing. "Truly, I am. But they needed us here, just as they still need us now. There's a lot of critical people in need of aid in just that house alone," she lectured, pointing towards the mayor's private villa as she tried to sway her stubborn brother's mind. "I overheard the message myself," she explained. "Mother wouldn't risk her soldiers this far out. Not unless I gave her a bigger reason to come." The prince shook his head in acknowledgement of her clever plan. "And now both of us are here." Arlo smirked, still annoyed at her but also genuinely impressed by her ingenious strategy to get these people the help they required. He patted his sister on the head. "Smart, sis. I guess Mom has to send the troops here now." The mayor spread his hands invitingly as he smiled towards us. "Good. Now, if all is all right again, I can send a messenger to wait for Camilla's next arrival on your behalf. For the meantime, please join us inside and take a look at what devastation the gnolls have caused this time around." We agreed and entered through the giant arch-shaped doors. Reuben's house was a red-draped mansion with long dividing corridors and other smaller inviting hallways. Like a hotel made for traveling guests, it had many identical wooden bedrooms. In the main recreational lodge, couches and tables had been hastily thrown into the corner by the canteen tables to make room for stretchers carrying wounded sprites. Locals all surrounding these unfortunate warriors as nurses and concerned family members sat alongside them. Chandeliers gave a dim glare as the approaching sunset seeped through the thick glass-stained windows, providing mild illumination within this congested long front dining room hall. Anara sped over to a farmer in the corner, who was coughing, pressing a hand to his bandaged wound in an attempt to reduce his pain while he laid breathless on the stretcher. Anara placed her hand on his wound. The bandage she touched became just as clear and transparent as her glassy hand, vanishing it from sight in order to reveal the man's infected cut. "Only 2 people here have infected wounds," she informed us. "One person also has internal bleeding." She sat beside her patient, this poor man too delirious to comprehend where he was, although sincerely grateful for her company. "I fear without surgical consult and a resupply of clean dressings, others will relapse too. I can't do any more for them on my own. Only Maxwell can treat them now, and I'm afraid without him." She trailed off, stumbling into a sadness truly empathetic to their plight, placing the back of her hand over the man's feverish forehead, feeling for a rising temperature. Anara had been learning the medical profession from Dr. Maxwell, the greatest surgeon we had in all of the borderlands. But all Inara could do without him was use her gifts to offer insight into the diagnosis of an illness. As with that, he could use his firefly attendants to offer all sorts of viable treatment solutions. For with their two talents combined, they were an unstoppable force, able to remedy any injury, regardless of its depth or severity. They had 100% survival rate, so long as they were side by side. But to bring the Great Doctor into an active war zone was not something our queen endorsed very often, knowing full well the ramification if he became injured. There's more than 30 survivors here, Arlo crudely estimated. Well, no. There is about 50, Inara corrected, counting the square rows of stretchers by the columns. And you helped save all these villagers, little sis? He said appreciatively towards her, forcing a brief smile out of her. There was a lot more yesterday, she admitted, her sad eyes lost in the recollection of the horrible night. Some is better than none, I said, trying to comfort her and give her some closure over her own trauma about last night's darkness. No matter how scary my situation had felt last night, Inara would have been recalling something unarguably similar. Only she did it all alone. The courage to push forward and still persevere, choosing to risk her own capture in order to retrieve and rescue the wounded in such senseless madness and hysteria, was nothing short of pure heroism. Something Inara and her mother once fought about profusely when she first made up her mind on becoming a nurse instead of an emissary or scout. I remember once she told the queen that saving an ally was better than killing an adversary. And when her mother questioned such childish philosophy, she told her mother it was because an enemy so focused on killing someone else was already hell-bent on killing themselves. So there was no point doing the job for them. The relationship between Inara and her mother was peculiar, to say the least. They were once inseparable, but through Inara's adolescence, they had slowly become bitter to one another. A relationship rotting away so slowly that it would be hard to pinpoint when and where exactly it all turned so wrong. I guess, morally and ethically speaking, the two of them were complete opposites. Inara was willing to invest a little faith into everybody, while Milena could only see the flaws in other people. It was an indifference in belief of who to trust that I believe was the reason for their ever-growing divide. It is a hostility that continues to grow as they both age, a relationship nearing the brink of emancipation, as his young daughter no longer wanted anything to do with her mother's love. "Arlo!" called out a cluster of moving voices from the door behind us. The injured nymph's calm and dormant rest immediately broken as Camilla and half her squadron of officers made their entrance. Dr. Maxwell slipping through the crowd with them, quickly approaching Inara and wasting no time in discussing how best to treat those most obviously unwell. A place suddenly swamped into a sea of flustering noise as guards fanned out chaotically in all directions, while Arlo debriefed Camilla next to me, explaining what had happened to us throughout the entire ordeal. His voice loud but too muffled for even me to overhear as the rest of the Alpha Regiment clashed metal boots against thin wooden floorboards as they made their dramatic entrance. At the doorway, among this cluster, I spotted a novice cadet, his faint silver hair streaks making him recognizable to me almost anywhere. It was my closest friend and Camilla's only son, Akoni. He leaned against the doorway tucked away in the corner, wearing his typical suit shirt and pants, with a thin, lightweight, shiny silver mesh battle vest to accompany it. Some new, shiny, clean, homemade chainmail he and his nerdy tech boys must have been working on prior to all this. A strong mix of silks and silvery metal blended together in order to cover him and his bulky gear like a high-performance flak jacket that was far better than any noble officer had in their own arsenal. He stood near the villa's entrance, doing his best to stay out of the way as nymphs nudged past him. An awkward, shy man trying his best not to be seen or to interfere while I wandered over to him wishing the same. He was a happy sight to see. He had an upgraded metal backpack, with new thin metallic boots and glare of blue, green and purple fire crackling in the vents of his electronic metal wrist bracers. The knight with no name, peasants all humbly mocked him, seeing as he was a geeky engineer who had proved his worth through innovation and discovery more than 100 times over, but still had never been recommended for knighting. One of the great injustices, in my opinion, especially when other knighted technicians had achieved much less than him, and yet been gifted with so much more. He was a mature 18-year-old brainiac who was so influential and vital to our society that some of us were beginning to speculate that our current king, Akoni's very own mentor, was too afraid to knight him because it might lead him to eventually stealing back the throne, just as King Helios had done to Akoni's father nearly 2 decades ago. In my heart, I doubted that was the truth, as anyone who knew Akoni knew he was nothing to be afraid of. He was a nerdy antisocial bookworm who, in essence, was probably the coolest person and niftiest friend I had ever met. There are people out there who might say a glass is half empty, where others might say it's half full. Akoni was the kind of person who would say, "What does it matter when all glasses are refillable anyway?" He was a sweet, modest, and reserved man, somebody way too smart for his own good. He was a person who could find everything curious, yet nothing mysterious. By trade, this made him appear more like a magician than a technician, even when he tried to explain the logic behind all the miraculous things he could perform using science and technological devices. He had generic brown eyes and short black hair that made him seem like nothing special. But underneath those eyes and his large dorky glasses, behind pale and tanned skin, was a man built to rule the borderlands. With gray frail tips in the front of his hair, which I believe came from a lack of outdoor sunlight, he always looked thin and scrawny on the surface, but it was his wit and resourcefulness that made him someone who could never be trifled with. Having only gained muscles from carrying books around all day, his small but heavy-looking knapsack always had exotic implements in it, which made him look a bit like a traveler or a merchant trying to sell utensils not of this world. A mechanic making magic from alchemy was how I thought of him as he sat there twitching a long thin cord attached to a silver pistol that trailed down to his belt and linked inconspicuously into the rocket cylinders protruding out of his dense but small metal backpack. He was the discoverer of fairy fire, a unique electrical flame only he possessed the power to control. This patented fluorescent purple flame looked something like a cloud of lightning, luminously concealed in misty black fumes, a miracle of artificial nature, greatly criticized and condemned by most superstitious folk of this region as that of sorcery or evil. I remember asking him why he even wanted to create a metal-eating flame when we can just build a fire. He replied, "Because it just seems foolish that we use a wood-burning flame when we live in a forest." After that, I never questioned his genius again. There was no hiding the fact he was one of a kind. His dense and robust carry pack was the first invention to ever offer ordinary nymphs flight from their predators, and, to an ordinary person, it weighed more than a star or a moon. To Akoni, it was somehow as light as a square pillowcase filled with feathers. "So what does the belt do?" I asked teasingly, knowing everything on him had to have some clever ulterior purpose. "Well, it holds my pants up," he sarcastically replied. "So it doesn't turn into a laser-sighted grapple gun or some electric flamethrower?" "No," he said. "I haven't needed any of those since I made my jetpack." He then comically added, openly sullying himself to make me smile, looking at the changes he'd made to his backpack. I quickly realized he was speaking some witty but solid truths. Initially, that backpack was just a generator that could convert static electricity into fuel for his fairy fire magic. But now that he added 2 tiny thruster rockets to the bottom of this turbine, I realized he had been preparing for a day like this for much of his adult life. "So you've field-tested this stuff?" I inquired, waving a hand over his wrist bracer and bulky belt buckle strap. "Your backpack looks even heavier than it did before," I added. "It's self-levitating, so technically it's weightless, so long as I keep it turned on," he said, commending his own work. "How long have you been working on this? It's not going to explode now, is it?" I inquired, more out of mockery than seriousness. "Long enough," he responded with a fair degree of confidence in his own work. It all looks very dangerous, I added, although consequently only adding to his arrogant boastfulness as he smirked, pulling out his holstered side flare gun. It's supposed to be, he said, lighting its purple pilot flame with his electric hands and activating that small prototype pistol, its barrel chamber spinning with a growing violet glow, as I merely shook my head in sarcastic disapproval. Why do I get the feeling you're going to get hit by a rock and blow up this house? I teased. I don't. Well, I'm pretty sure it's perfectly stable. Pretty sure? I laughed, not sure if he was joking or being serious. He looked down at his invention. Yeah, no. It's like at least 40% safe, he indecisively remarked, a devilish smile unveiling his mischievous humor. I should have known he was joking, since he was the kind of person who always did his homework. I remembered back to a couple of years ago when he'd first tried explaining to me what that unique purple flame was and how it worked. Something about condensing argon in the atmosphere because it can't hold static charge, and that by using electromagnetic induction, he could create superheated metallic decay. His inventions were a real sophisticated kind of science, something leagues beyond everyone else's understanding. Having no comparable rival, he really was just like his father, an inventor with inventions no one could reproduce, especially when it came to solar technology. His genius was the true reason this boy and his mother were offered redemption after their father's forced exile. Oconee was an asset to the crown, the one true hope of us ever being able to restore the Sunspire to its former glory, which begged the question of why Milena or Camilla would risk bringing him here. So how did your presentation go? I asked, pointing towards the purple demonstration gun of his, changing the subject to find out what exactly I had missed back home. Well, it was cut short, he replied. It was actually quite the scene. All the girls had their attention fixed solely on me for once, and then the prince gets declared missing in action, he recounted with a chuckle. And what of a missing princess? I asked. I don't think the girls were too worried about her, actually, he said as nonchalantly as possible, his eyes briefly drifting towards Inara at the other side of the room, where she was helping the doctor. What about the boys? I pressed. I'm sure there was one boy in particular who must have been worried about her, I joked, aware of the super crush he had on the princess. Kaya, I came here for you. I was afraid you would choose the gnolls' company over the princess. He laughed in a comical kind of diversion. I pushed on. What if I told you she felt the same way? I asked, baiting a response. Does she? He blurted out, almost loud enough for Inara to hear. I waited a moment, enjoying the anticipation on his face before I had to sadly burst his bubble. Well, I don't know. You told me not to tell anyone about your crush. So I've never asked her if she likes you, I then cheekily confessed before getting back to the root of my scheme. But if I had just told you that she does, would that have given you the confidence to actually walk up to her and find out for yourself? Oconee seemed unimpressed by my meddling, but took a moment to consider my words before exhaling in defeat. Her mother doesn't, he defensively reasoned, still admiring Inara as she worked. Her mother isn't here, and even if she was, that would only strengthen your case, I reassured him jokingly, nudging his arm playfully. Has there ever been a better time? I quickly tried to egg him on. Despite us being beside the injured and in between war zones, everything was beginning to seem more cheerful, an unlikely end to a long and rough 2 days. The doctor was here now and had begun stabilizing his patients. Soon we would be able to leave, and with Camilla here, we'd be able to travel safely back to the castle through her Marketplace Way stone portal. I started dreaming about being in my bed and sleeping, a privilege I felt I had earned after everything. only to have those dreams shattered loudly and abruptly by the crashing sounds of door chips splintering beside Akoni and me. Odie had just barged in like a rolling boulder. Odie, short for Odysseus, was a very old friend of mine and only a recent addition to Camilla's Alpha Legion. He was a stumpy, roundish gnome renowned for his thick, stone-calloused skin, short-term memory loss, and a very noteworthy level of destructive clumsiness. He had literally just glided through the front door with his body tucked in like a smoothed, skimming stone, uncurling himself as he started waving his hands. "Outside! Outside!" he puffed, pointing impatiently like an overgrown concrete teddy bear. Camilla abandoned Arlo's debriefing and followed the direction Odie was pointing. Odie grew up with me in the orphanage. We were the last two left to be adopted, and we used to be like brother and sister purely because of that. And although different jobs had separated us lately, I still felt greatly responsible for watching over him, for, underneath his indestructible rock-hard skin, he was an eternal child at heart. Fortune never favoring him until the lucky day I met Camilla and told her all about him and what he could do. "Hi, Kaya," he sweetly said to me as I kneeled down to hug him. Everyone began looking at each other with worry, and then Arlo rushed past me, venturing outside to investigate the matter personally. Our fear of danger quickly realized when a bell started clanging in warning from a nearby church tower, the shock of it pulsing through my body with each clang of the bell. Akoni had the same petrified expression on his face as I did. I think he might have actually been more scared, as I had to yank him to follow the soldiers so we could go find his mother, who was already halfway outside the manor. Sprites had to grow up quickly out here, and as terrified as I had felt over the past day and a half, I felt more strengthened and resilient because of it. It was a shame I couldn't pass on my experiences to Akoni, who was shaking and pale as I dragged him along with me. We found Camilla and realized how bad the situation was. I was not mentally prepared for another eclipse. One was more than enough for a lifetime. But, peering out across the scenic Bayside Villa Beach hills, I witnessed the halo-roofed rock cove darkening as the sunset slowly progressed into a dimmer prevailing dusk night. Gray storm clouds emerging as the light rapidly declined, and I found myself in another living nightmare. "Akoni, what are you doing here?" Camilla exclaimed as we entered the circle her and her soldiers had formed, bluntly but rhetorically inquiring as her son dumbly scratched his head. Was all he could manage to say, lost for any reasonable explanation. Anara and the doctor saving Akoni from having to concoct some immediate answer as they ran in joint fluster towards Camilla and her ever-increasing warrior circle. It was a collective of the finest knights the Borderlands had to offer, and they gravitated around their leader, who centered herself in the middle of this outside front fern garden, just slightly above the sandy beachfront and its small hilly dunes. "We can't move them, Cammy." "Not in time," Dr. Maxwell said. "That's the least of our problems," Camilla replied, looking straight to her son before vanishing in a quick puff of smoke. We all began looking around for her, distinguishing her silhouette by her glorious banners. She stood on top of the huge lighthouse tower, glancing from its arched roof half of the town away, using it to offer her the best view of the village. Even from where we stood, we could see gnolls silently creeping along the outskirts and rooftops of the town. They passed by the useless killer crabs, which peacefully patrolled their way along the forefront entrance gates. "You all need to leave," Camilla dramatically and rather obviously stated, popping back up behind us, specifically talking to the prince and princess, who were alongside her reckless son. "No," Arlo and Anara said in unison. "We can help," Anara protested. "You need more of us right now, not less," Arlo declared, just as reluctant to retreat. The regiment looked ready to erupt in riot and argument. Hot-headed soldiers all on the brink of chaos and rebellion. But everybody stayed quiet and reserved and took their turns to speak their knowledge and specialization. a clear indication of their personal experience and professional training in working as one solid team. Luckily, we had the best in the borderlands. "Go to the stone, ma'am. Call the queen for reinforcements," Eris said, surprising me, as I hadn't realized he was beside us once again. "We can hold this high ground. These private gates are spiky and huge. The gnolls will have to climb over one by one, and the dunes and hills will bottleneck them up the easy path." "Yes, but everything below will still be overrun," the doctor disputed on behalf of the powerless locals in the town far beneath. "It's too late for escape. They're already here. Evacuation is out of the question," Eris was quick to protest. Camilla stood still, deliberating what to do. "Then we need a sanctuary somewhere in the middle of the town," she hastily replied, siding with the doctor. "The tavern," I announced, pointing to the large square rooftop by the marketplace. "I saw it before. It's already boarded up and probably big enough to hold all the villagers inside," I added, trying to be useful, a bit of an awkwardness floating around the circle as I spoke, but many in that circle surprisingly accepting my suggestion with just cause. Camilla remained silent but then nodded, doing her best to carefully consider my idea before actually accepting it. "It is the best option we have," she then declared, praising me with a small shoulder pat while pacing around the edge of this inner circle. "Search and rescue only. Don't initiate unless provoked. Make no mistake, only Helios is going to be able to save us. We need to get him and bring him safely to the lighthouse. Then he can illuminate the streets and force them away," she elaborated with a warming optimism, uplifting our spirits as the street presence of the vicious gnolls became abundantly clear to everyone from our uphill view. "All the miners will remain here," she dictated, "and no more folk will be ferried in here once these gates are shut." She then quickly added, making sure the susceptible members of the group, such as us and the doctor, were given highest priority. "A clever and kind way of hiding us newbies from danger and keeping us out of the chaos below." Akoni and I both sharing a look of pure relief upon hearing it, more than happy to comply with Camilla's strict orders. "Zephyr, my friend," she said, glancing over her shoulder to a silent and stern-looking hooded marksman furthest from the circle. "Get as high as you can and oversee the evacuation." The man then nodded and moved away from the edge of the circle, bracing himself for a swift and powerful jump. Legs warping as thick muscles shifted positions in preparation for a gigantic leap. "Set any houses alight if you have to, but keep the pathway to that lighthouse secure," she emphasized before his huge aerial vault. "Just not the tavern," she then quickly added. Everyone having a little chuckle as Zephyr rolled his eyes back, drawing strength through focus only to launch off his legs like a spring, skyrocketing into the air with an outlandish spiraling battle jump. Us miners gasped as we felt the air around us break, watching Zephyr's vertical takeoff, freefall, and then watch him somehow landing perfectly on the church bell tower without the impact of such a landing, making a sound or damaging a single tiled brick that he landed upon. He drew an arrow from his leg quiver and loaded his bow, ready to fire at the gnolls should they come out of hiding. He was a skilled sniper, already quick to reinforce the few fleeing townspeople who had caught wind of the invasion. "Please, who can't do that?" Arlo said, winking at me in coy boastfulness, referring to our earlier jump out of the swampland well. I admit what he had done was similar, but with Zephyr there was an incomparable and vital level of control that made it cool to watch. "It's his landing that's impressive, Arlo," I sniped back in a whisper. "Eris," Camilla then dictated, sparing no time to procrastinate. "You and Odie are ground support." "Fantastic," Eris responded sarcastically, unenthused by the fact he was once again in the front lines, only this time with our chaotic stone wrecking ball. It had been quite a long time since I'd last seen Odie. He had left his old life well and truly behind, undergoing vigorous field training that had kept him mostly outside the castle's walls. Camilla choosing to take him in straight after his graduation, seeing as reinforcements were so urgently needed at the time. Without any street wit or former combat experience to decorate himself with, Odie's knighting in addition to her vanguard unit had come with great contestation by the council. They'd considered his knighting as unorthodox and of great insult to many others, such as Arlo and Ebony, who had many years of fight training under their belt. Camilla taking him under her wing, nevertheless, going against the council's judgment. He proved his worth almost immediately, acting as a legion's battering ram, paving the way for the rest of the squadron's entrance. They utilized this tiny rock ogre best when they were in wild places with no need for containing his destructive maneuvers, as his greatest weakness was that he had little ability to control where he was going when he was curled up like a boulder, rolling and colliding against everything in his path. I don't like to belittle Odie, but being new and very susceptible to suggestions, I felt he was virtually a free-to-hire mercenary who could flatten an entire town simply because an anonymous stranger politely asked him to do so. A scary scenario for a lot of us to consider, and pretty much the only reason the council was so greatly against bringing Odie into their military ranks. The conflict was that he saw everyone as friendly and hence no one as being capable of evil. He quite literally would adhere to anyone that whispered into his easygoing ears. "I want you to take good care of each other, and stay close," Camilla reminded Eris, authorizing him to watch over Odie carefully. I knew it wasn't my place to question Camilla, so I did my best to refrain my frown as I remained unable to comprehend why Camilla appeared to still have an unfaltering faith in the Sand King, despite his assertion of Arlo and me last night. "It's your job to reach the tavern and defend its doors," she instructed them. "As you wish, my lady," Eris announced in an unnaturally obedient tone, strangely content now with what he'd been asked to do. "The rest of you are in charge of evacuation. Get everyone from their houses to the tavern, and then join Eris and Odie in protecting it," she concluded, allowing a moment for the short dozen of them to consort with each other individually, grabbing picks, axes, ropes, and swords. Intermingling in strategy as she walked over to the prince for a last-minute request. "Radamant was the finest defender we ever had," she respectfully divulged to him. "Despite what many would think, I would always assign him with the most important tasks," she continued, talking to the prince beside her son and me, while Anara and the doctor headed back inside to check on their patients. "With him gone, I will be giving you a task normally reserved for him. I hope you're ready for this." "I am, my lady," Arlo humbly vowed, granting her his complete and undivided attention. "I'm placing you in defense of this villa. Keep all the civilians up here and safely out of sight," she instructed, looking deeply into his eyes as she waited for him to confirm. "I will," he stated, making the oath without joke or cynicism before Camilla gave a brief but timid smile, disappearing from all sound and sight in one short puff of smoke. Camilla made it sound as though she wanted Arlo to protect every wounded farmer and their families, but the prolonged stare she'd given him had given me the impression she'd really meant to protect Akoni, Anara, and myself over the latter. The regiment dispersed out to their varying tasks, with Zephyr leaping from the ground to rooftop as he scouted the town, ready to end the deadly calm atmosphere by igniting the cold, foggy air with searing arrows lit from each candlewick edge of his leafy green and gold bark bow. Condensing into a coarse, rigid stone, Odie tucked his jagged, rocky limbs into a spherical ball, allowing gravity and momentum to take a harsh hold as he rolled downhill, accurately managing to pass through the open gates only to pinball off houses, cracking them as he heavily bounced into, off, and then through them on his increasingly rapid descent towards the lowest level of the marketplace crossroads. Fortunately, he managed to re-expand himself before colliding into the marble gateway stone itself, and breaking the very instrument we needed to survive this firefight. His appearance drawing all shrouded creatures towards him almost like a magnet being thrown into the middle of a tool shed. Eris was very slow to follow after him, deciding not to bring his faithful flying ant this time around. He slowly slid his way down the sandy hill, pulling knives from the elbow slots of his jacket in preemptive caution, eventually rejoining his comrades as he and a small garrison of unknown members followed him in unison. If I hadn't been terrified of being in another eclipse, I would have been truly honored to have been here, witnessing the most revered legends in action as they defended another town from an overbearing armada of adversaries. Thankfully, the villa was nestled in the highest corner of the cove, with the beach and coast protecting its rear, which meant there was only one way up, climbing over high thorny spike gates and ascending up the narrowing sandy beach entrance. The path bottlenecked under a tiny valley of sand dunes, of which the prince idly stood over in wait, watching his heroes from just inside the initial gates. The gnolls moved like shadows as they continued to shuffle and creep their way into the town, stalking some unsuspecting residents without any form of direct confrontation yet. Akoni and I watched in a nervous yet impatient excitement. It was fair to say we were adequately safe where we were. We used Akoni's night vision glasses in turns, snatching them back and forth from each other so we could see what was happening among this growing stormy cold darkness. Humbly just waiting for something heavy and loud to drop and ignite this upcoming frenzy.